what does it look like for us in an embodied way to like recondition, right? To create new conditioning in the body, new capacity, new skills, right? New relationships that allow us to show up for the very uncertain work, right? Of right now and the future that is to come.
Welcome to the New World Normal podcast. I'm Debbie Harrell, your host, and twice a month I'm speaking with some amazing humans who are disrupting norms and working to create a more inclusive and holistic society. These people are using their sphere of influence, no matter how large or small, to positively impact the world around them. They'll be sharing their expertise as well as sharing stories of resiliency and hope. We'll be talking about the issues that are affecting us all, from the environment, human rights, social issues, criminal justice, and education. We'll talk about our healthcare systems, wellness, and food, from how it's cultivated and distributed to how it's prepared and consumed. Basically, we're going to talk about all the systems in our society that aren't necessarily working for the benefit of the many. We'll strategize and collaborate on how we as a collective can intentionally make better choices every day that will lead to a positive change in the world around us. Because in the end, it's up to us to solve these problems. There is no magic potion or magic wand. It is us and our daily choices and how we spend our time and how we invest our resources. Intrigued? Stick around and have a listen, and by all means, click like or subscribe on your favorite podcast source. Hello, and welcome back to the New World Normal. I'm Debbie Harrell, and today I am speaking with Kerri Kelly, who is an activist and wellness disruptor. She is also the founder of CTZNWELL, and she previously spent 7 years as the executive director of the nonprofit Off the Mat Into the World. She is relentless in her commitment to elevating community consciousness and engagement around a culture and politics that democratizes well-being for everyone. But I have to say that my favorite thing about this conversation is the way the universe just decided to plop Kerri right into my inbox. And as I was reading this random email from an unknown source, I couldn't believe how aligned her messaging is with what I'm trying to create here at the New World Normal. So I really hope you enjoy this conversation. Welcome, Kerri. Thank you so much for taking the time to come and talk to us today in this busy, busy week. Book launch week.
Right? It's such a weird and absolutely like non-climactic normal week. It's like both of those things at the same time.
Are you loving it? Are you like, what did I get myself into?
You know, the whole thing has been like one big journey, right? Like every step of the process has been new and unfamiliar and transformative and challenging in really different ways. So this week has just been a different phase of that, quite frankly, on the long road, on the long, path to wherever the hell we're going. So it's been super fun. I mean, I'll say that like my favorite thing about this process has been being in conversation with folks, right? Either when I was interviewing people for the book via research or whether I'm just talking to folks about the book now. So that this part is the most fun for me, for sure.
It is definitely the most affirming and makes you feel a little less alone in this crazy time we're living in. Like, oh gosh, people are talking about this stuff and people do want to have these conversations. I know I was super excited. I was lucky enough to get an advanced copy of the book. I'm about halfway through it. It's amazing concepts that you're bringing forward, conversations that you're encouraging to happen. It's a great book club book for anybody out there that gets it and wants to do a book club. So many juicy topics to dive into.
I feel like writing the book, I just want to say this because you just made me think of this for the first time ever. I feel like writing this book in and of itself was a book club for me because I had to call a lot of people in, a lot of different people for different chapters. I had to call people into my journey and process. And, there's a lot of digging deep in my own practice, right? In order to write the things that I wrote. So anyway, so I'm just like reflecting on that because you're right. It is a great book to do in a book club because it's dense, right? And it's got a lot of complexity in it and it's rich. And that was also my experience. Like I got to write this book in the context of community.
Right. And that's the bigger message, that it is community. It's the collective that needs to do this work. We all need to heal. We're not going to heal by ourselves. We need to heal together in community. So yes. And I know when I was reading the introduction, I was like highlighting like a crazy woman, the concept of being pushed to go back to normal.
Yeah.
Like, but what was this normal? Which is exactly the things that I was thinking about. And I love this line. Do you mind if I read a
Of
line?
course.
Because you're talking about that we're a nation at a crossroads, right? There's so much shit happening, and like, what are we going to do to fix it? But you offer this. We will imagine beyond the status quo, dreaming up new systems that take care of everyone. We will emerge into our purposeful role as engaged citizens for humanity.
That's my hope for folks, and I know that's the question I've been living into for the last 2 decades, right? Is, how do we navigate this really messy in between moment between where we're coming from and where we're going? And what is our right role in building the future?
And how does that happen? Because it is the messy part. And that's like, everybody is so fearful of that mess and the tearing down of these systems that aren't working. But we're clearly seeing that just holding them up is just as messy and just as hurtful and just as scary.
So it's like both like amazing to me that people cannot see that the structures and the systems in place are harming all of us and disproportionately so, right? Based on our social location, but we are not going in a good direction by any evidence. And I also want to say, just to hold folks in like compassion, that I think the many accelerating crises we are facing right now can be so overwhelming for the nervous system that it's no wonder people are shutting down and just like turning to the thing that feels most familiar, right? Which for a lot of people, and I write about this in the book, is escape, and like staying, in their gated community of wellness, their bubble. And for other people, it's going back to normal. And we saw this right after the pandemic. And this is the stuff that you write and talk about, right? How sometimes faced with going beyond normal can be overwhelming for people. And part of the spiritual practice I think that we need right now is to build up the capacity and the courage, right? To stretch, like to like imagine better, right? Than the messed up systems that we've inherited and these, these constructs that have been placed on us. And so anyway, so this is like, I think the role that spiritual practice plays in the how, as you named it, in the how we navigate this moment.
Exactly. I feel like that's a part that is easily glossed over. And a lot of people will just say, well, I just turn off the news and then I feel better. Well, and that's because you're privileged and you can turn off the news because it's not affecting you in your bubble. But the reality is, and what I've been trying to work on in my little community is, yes, how do we take care of ourselves? How do we regulate our nervous system so we can stay engaged with what's going on around us and be more effective participants in the process?
Yeah. And I would even say that like folks may not be affected directly, but I actually think that all of us are being affected indirectly in different ways. And I think the pandemic is a perfect example of, a global virus, right? That in many ways proved our interdependence, right? That no one was immune, right, to that virus, that everyone was vulnerable, although we were vulnerable in different ways, right? Because the virus impacted us so disproportionately. And the other thing that is resonating about what you're saying is something that I learned from Resmaa Menakem, right? In My Grandmother's Hands. He also just wrote this book, The Quaking of America. That's like fire. Everybody should go get that book. And he talks about the ways in which we need to recondition ourselves, right? Like we've been conditioned by dominant culture, right? And by entrenched systems and structures, and by the people, right, who raised us. I think that's impossible to avoid, right? The ways in which we're shaped, but we can actively, right, create a counterculture. We can actively recondition our bodies and our minds, right? Build new muscle and capacity for how, we take care, we tend to our nervous system, to your point, but also how we tend to our ego, right? Like the ego also, especially for white people, tends to really get in the way. Right, tends to want to self-preserve at all costs, tends to want to defend and often, offend, right, in defense of oneself. And so anyway, so I love this idea, right, of like, what does it look like for us in an embodied way to like recondition, right, to create new conditioning in the body, new capacity, new skills, right, new relationships that allow us to show up for the very uncertain work, right, of right now and the future that is to come.
What practical ways do you think people can accomplish that? Like, are there any tips you have for like, how do I recondition myself?
Part of it is some of what you already named, which is, and this is a lot of the grappling I do in this book is constant interrogation, right? Constant curiosity about the ways in which we've been shaped and conditioned and what we've internalized, right? I'm 46 years old. I've been in this culture and on this planet and living right in the domestic United States for 46 years, right? And so that's 46 years of being indoctrinated, right? Receiving constant messages from every direction, right? From my family, from my schools, from my community, from the institutions that I ran in, from my corporate, career. And then add to that, layer into that media and the internet and Google and Twitter and Insta, right? So it's like, we can't avoid the kind of the toxic air, right? That we're all breathing in. And so to be curious about that, like, what have I internalized, right? What have I come to believe that I learned from somewhere else? Where did I learn that, right? One of the things I talk about in the book is perfectionism, right? I call myself a recovering perfectionist. And I learned that. That was learned from my school, from the community that I grew up in, from culture, that I was supposed to strive, that I had to strive and overachieve and hustle and burn myself to the ground and keep reaching and reaching and reaching beyond this impossible destination, which only kept me in the hamster wheel, right? It only kept the hamster wheel alive. We comply, right? We comply. We give in when we're not paying attention. We buy into the lies, and it only keeps the treadmill, the hamster wheel, the ladder, right? The structures and the systems going. And so that first thing for me, I feel like, is question everything, y'all. Like, question everything you learned, question everything you believe. Some other things I unpack in this book is the scarcity mindset and how quick we are to default to that setting, how quick we are to be like, I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. I went through all of that in this book. Even after knowing that conceptually, those thoughts still came up for me over and over and over again. Every day I wrote this book where I was like, who do I think I am writing this book? Like, how dare I? And I don't deserve to be seen. And my story is not important enough to be heard and to make a difference. So anyway, so it's like, what are the, what have you internalized, and what are the stories that you tell to yourself about yourself, and are they true? And most of them might be, in fact, very much skewed from the dominant and toxic culture that we exist in. So that's one thing I'll say. Another super tangible thing I want to name, because this book also, like, I feel like I want to like myth bust. This doesn't have like here are the 7 steps to blah, blah, blah. I tried to avoid that because I knew that, like, especially in dominant wellness culture, we're really quick to be like, tell me how to fix myself,
Yes, I need a list.
Give me another list. And so I was like, I'm not going to do that because I don't know.
Right. Everybody's story is so individual. Everything you've experienced, like you're going to, that is such an amazing point that you made.
And we're all being treated, right, by society in different ways, right? So our shaping is different based on our lived experience. And I in particular have a lived experience as a white, cis, straight, able-bodied woman, right? So I was shaped in a particular way. I was socialized to play my assigned role, right? To uphold normativity, right? And the systems that keep certain people in power and exclude everyone else. And so the second thing I'll say is that the discoveries that come out of asking those questions have come through relationship. I have a meditation practice and a yoga practice. And so like sitting with myself in contemplation and quieting my mind has been really, really helpful. And the most radical discoveries I have made about what is true and what is real and what is possible has been in relationship, has been in being in relationships of accountability, being in relationships across lines of difference, reaching outside of my bubble or the people most proximal to me. And so I just want to say that too, because I know that that's not often named as like a tangible, like, well, how do you do it? And it's like, get in relationship and then see what happens, right? Because relationships are inherently transformative and they will mirror back to you what you cannot see. And that often fills the gap, right? Of like what we can't access when we're just doing this practice on our mat or on our cushion or in a extremely individualized way.
I appreciate that you said that. And I'll also offer it as a permission because I know that I've spoken to people who are nervous about that relationship and like, I don't want to do anything, wrong or say something stupid. What do you say to that? Like, what does allyship And how does that look? And how do you be a good ally?
Well, what I'll say about that is when I'm talking about relationships, I'm not necessarily talking about like, I'm not telling people to like go find the person most different from you and build a bridge. I'm not that person. I actually think that can be really harmful at times. And it often puts a burden on other people. And I know that's what some people are being called to do. Right. And I know it's been transformative for me, when I have had the ability, to build trust and relationship with people who have a really different lived experience from me. Those have been some of the most transformative relationships of my life. And I think what I would say to people is just build relationships in general, right? Like just start to build real, true relationships that both will tell the truth, right? Like people that will tell you the truth and people that will hold you accountable, right? Because I think that's often the kinds of relationships that help us grow. Now, to answer your question about allyship, because I'm really glad you asked it. And I think, I don't talk a lot about allyship in this book because I think the entire book is an exploration of what it means to be embodied in solidarity. And the challenge about the idea of allyship and the way in which I think we've been sold allyship by kind of like social media and dominant culture, and also the way in which I think our ego attaches itself to allyship is that it often reinforces an othering and a power dynamic, right? Often people go into it without an analysis of power, and it's about helping the other, right? It's about doing something, being a good person to someone who might be more marginalized by systems of power. Sometimes it's about sympathies, right? So like often it's deeply unconscious and it just upholds the very things we're trying to dismantle. And the thing that allyship often doesn't get at is the fact that our well-being and our liberation are in fact bound. And there's that great quote. Lilla Watson is known for having said it, but I believe it actually originates with the Aboriginal people of Australia. And it says, if you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. And so I think any way in which privileged people are feeling called to help, I don't think there's anything wrong with helping or serving or standing up in solidarity. We have to be hyper vigilant, right? That the way in which we're doing that is not only not othering, not creating a false separation, right, between yourself and the other person, but that it's not also upholding a power dynamic where you're more powerful than the person that you're helping, right? That or that you might have more control, or that you might, the legacy of this dynamic, right, is Christian missionary work. It's white saviorism. It's imperialism and colonization, right? So it's super toxic, harmful, violent legacies and patterns that come from that sort of like power over dynamic. And so that's my cautionary tale when folks are kind of grappling with like, how do I be a good ally? I would say like, do your work, like look at yourself. That's the first step. I think a lot of people would ask, folks, especially with privileged who've been asleep and who haven't been able to see for a long time take a good hard look at yourself, interrogate yourself and reckon, right? Take account, be accountable to the ways in which you're complicit and a part of the system. Then get in relationship. And to me, when you're engaging in relationships across lines of difference or from different lived experiences, and which is like an enormous spectrum, by the way, where we all have incredibly complex identities and different lived experiences, some of which are personal, some of which are systemically oriented, that those relationships are alive. And there's no one way to act, right? There's no one way to be an ally. There's no one way to be a friend, right? Or to give, to offer support, right? Or to love on someone. We all know that just by being in the individual relationships that we're in. And so the same goes here. It's like we have to be so present to what is emerging and to what is needed that we can shed all the shoulds about, performance activism and allyship and just show up for the unique and very authentic experience of being in a relationship.
That makes perfect sense. As we were just saying, like everybody is so individual and everybody's completely different. So of course your allyship is going to look different for every opportunity that you have to participate in that way. And it's more about coming alongside somebody.
Yeah. And walking with, right. But I think also like, there is nuance, right? So like I was just talking to a friend of mine, Valerie Kaur, who I wrote about in the book. And we have this super incredible story around 9/11 because I lost my stepdad on 9/11, who was a fireman. And Valerie lost a family friend named Balbir Sodhi, who was the first Sikh American to be murdered because of 9/11, 4 days after 9/11. And so like we collided with one another. Like we didn't plan, we just like were in a room and we were both telling our stories and we both had this like super transformational wake up call. And one of the things I was just saying to her, and so we talk a lot about what it is to be in relationship, radical relationship with one another, what it is to have been changed by one another's story and impacted. And one of the things I often share about that is that, and this is where, the idea of like walking alongside, because sometimes when you're walking with sometimes you walk forward a couple steps and sometimes you fall back. And what I was sharing is that my story of 9/11 is the story that is often centered. The first responders and the firemen and the people who died, right, in the attacks are often centered and celebrated and remembered on 9/11, but the people that are often marginalized by that kind of cultural story are the people who were targeted and murdered and lost to war because of 9/11, because of the retaliation after 9/11. And that was the case with obviously Balbir Sodhi, who was murdered by a white man who called himself a patriot. And so I say that because that's an example of like to walk with Valerie sometimes is also to like step back and let my story fall back so that Balbir's story can come forward, right? Can be centered, right? And to me, that's what equity is about, right? It's about being able to see clearly the ways in which we're not all starting from the same place. And different people's stories and identities and capabilities are valued, right, in this sort of false system, this hierarchy of bodies. And so walking with, I think, includes locating oneself inside of that structure so that we can be most skillful about when so-called allyship, I'll call it, is actually stepping back and having someone's back, or actually when it's stepping forward and offering protection because we take on less risk. Does that make sense?
It does. And I love the clarification. And I love the example of pulling yourself back so her story could come forward. And one thing that I think is overlooked, we're talking about the different aspects of the story surrounding 9/11, whereas the stories that are often celebrated and remembered versus the people that had to die in the war after versus the people that were targeted. One thing that I think that is overlooked from all the traumas that are happening in our society is just that, the trauma that every single one of those people that were directly affected and indirectly affected, which, hello, everybody, it's all of us, are now carrying forward. And a lot of us don't really have the tools or the resources to deal with that aspect of our mental health.
I mean, it feels like another thing I would add to like, what is the salve of this moment, right? Like, what do we need to walk through is we need to tend to ourselves, right? And to each other, right? And I think, one of the things I love about what I've learned about the vagus nerve is that it's not just about self-regulation, it's actually about co-regulation, that we regulate together. We're able to bring our nervous systems into balance in relationship to one another, especially when we're in trusted community. So I really appreciate what you're saying, right? And I think this is where wellness could actually be really, really, really powerful, right? If it were to like shed its toxic cloaks, because it offers us many points of entry, right? Many different ways in which we can return to ourselves. We can learn to come into balance. We can learn to work with our anxiety and our fear, right? Because we know the cost of not doing that, of living through our trauma or letting fear drive the car. And so I just want to name that, like, this book that I wrote, I think often people might think it's like a rejection of wellness. It's actually a reclaiming of it. It's like, no, we actually need this. We need these practices in this moment. We need to be able to take care of ourselves, right, with more skill and practice. And we need to make sure that we're doing that in ways that are both responsible and collective.
If you're enjoying this conversation, you'll love the discussions happening in the New World Normal community, where we meet regularly to discuss personal growth and social issues. Because we know when we do our work, we're better able to navigate this ever-changing world. Be sure to follow the link in the show notes for more information. Dealing with it in the moment, like getting rid of that checklist of wellness, like we need to do this, this, and this. I'll offer an opportunity, like when you had created the space to run a challenge or your detox program, which was a chakra healing, which was lovely. But the first meeting happened on the day of the Uvalde shooting. And my backstory includes the Vegas shooting. So for me, shootings are always a little extra. And I was going about my day, check, 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 got to keep going. And when I got to your meeting and you took a pause and you're like, I had a list of things that we were going to cover, but I feel like we just need to check in and see how each other's doing. And the deep breath I was able to take. And really, that was one of the first times I actually checked in with myself, because I hadn't let myself check in and tell them because I was busy doing my day.
And that's information too, right? Like, what are the ways in which we cope when we're overwhelmed by what's happening in the world? And I do the same thing. My coping mechanism is to work, right? So like I go into like triage mode. So I'm like, something's happening. I need to like research something or do something or write a paper or, get on Twitter or blah, 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 and that's just another way I want to avoid the discomfort and the pain. Right. And so what I felt coming into that meeting with lots of people, I didn't know, right. This wasn't like the second meeting. This was the first meeting of all of us coming together in this shared practice. And there are people that I didn't know. This is the first time you and I met. And I was, I probably could have done one of two things, right? I could have been like, let's just move forward and this might be of service to you. And, but like, I think I checked in with myself and I realized that I wasn't okay. And then I facilitated from that place, I'm not okay. This just happened. I don't know what is needed. Will you tell me what you need?
That's a perfect example of like, I questioned my should and went from there and got curious, like, how am I feeling and what feels right in this moment?
And that sacred pause, right? Before we get hooked into like that default setting, right? My default setting would have been to like control the meeting and blah, 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 and give people a great experience and just distract them from what's happening in the world. Like that's what I do when I'm not paying attention. But I dropped in and I was like, oh, that's not what I need. And I would imagine that's not what's needed. I want to know what's needed. I'm going to listen for what's needed. And listen, I think that like that approach to everything, whether you're in a meeting or a relationship or leading a project or working with people, your peers at work, that's a really, really good place to always start in terms of like building trust and building collective capacity to do like really great work.
I agree. Good stuff. I appreciate that you identify that you're asking your readers to get uncomfortable. Like, this book isn't light and fluffy. It's not rainbows and sunshine. It's asking you to examine which is uncomfortable.
It's funny. I just read one of my first reviews of the book. I love that I'm telling you this publicly. Literally like one of the first reviews I saw posted, and it was like, it's very preachy. And I was like, and I kind of was like, maybe it is actually, I can get that way for sure. That's kind of my style. If you get me on like a soapbox, like I'll keep going for a long time. And, I think there's, what I'll say is that like, it was uncomfortable for me to write this stuff, because I was practicing it as, I was going through this inquiry as I was writing this book. And I think I wrote actually a very different book because of that, because I was willing to let myself feel into the questions and to hold myself accountable, right? For where I wasn't really showing up for the things I was asking other people to. And so anyway, so I say that because I know how uncomfortable this book is.
And I would offer, maybe it needs to be preachy. We are a society starving for leaders who are going to lead us someplace. Not that I'm saying you're propping yourself up as one of those leaders, but definitely the ideas that you are bringing forward and shining a light on are the things that we need to talk about.
Yeah. And the thing that I'm trying to be more skillful around is, how to give people the information, how to speak from my own lived experience, how to do the work myself and often like share from that place. Like, I did this and here's the mistake that I made, and damn, don't do that. Don't do what I did. And I also want to hold people in compassion. I think it's hard for folks to get uncomfortable. Sometimes it feels impossible, right? Depending on people's, to your point, trauma, depending on their lived experience. It might be terrifying to go to some of these places that I'm calling people. And so I really do want people to take care of themselves as they ask these questions of themselves, right? As they contemplate and grapple with their role, their part in the whole of who we are in these systems that are holding us back from collective well-being. And so I'm really trying to also hold that sort of that trauma informed and also like empathic, compassionate piece with more skill. Cause, I've been like a political activist my whole life. I'm also a Leo. So like, I tend to like, I tend to like bring a hammer everywhere I go. And sometimes that's the right medicine, right? And sometimes it's not. Sometimes people can't hear you when you bring a hammer. And so anyway, so I really appreciate that. And to answer your original question, it's like, I know that this book is going to make you uncomfortable because it made me uncomfortable. And I believe also that we all need to build more conditioning around getting uncomfortable, around experiencing new and unfamiliar things, around embracing uncertainty and the I don't know. And different people are going to need different things in that journey, right? And some people, I've had people tell me that they need to like start and stop the book. It's too much. And I'm like, cool. I'm like, you should actually do that. It's why I'm excited for this book club, because I actually feel like we can walk with each other as we ask these hard questions and offer mutual support. So I imagine a lot of different people are going to have a lot of different experiences of this book, especially depending on where they're located and what their lived experience has been. And I hope that folks get uncomfortable, but I also hope that folks learn how to take care of themselves, right, in that process. Because I don't want to annihilate people, right? I want people to come out of this experience feeling capable of more.
Yes, we are capable. We are whole. And I love the idea of the balance of accountability and compassion.
My friend Mark Gonzalez calls it actually accountability and grace, which I love. And I'm still in like a process of like understanding what grace is for myself. But I love that, right? Because it's like giving ourselves the grace to be messy and to fall apart and to make mistakes that allows for us to grow, right? And to stretch into new places and new possibilities.
And that's an important point that you make about the grace not being just directed for other people, but turn back on ourselves. It's a lot of times easier to have grace for other people, but then we forget that it's for us. And that perfectionism, we don't want to make any mistakes. Like I can't make a mistake, so I'm just not going to do anything at all. Well, that's not going to help anything, because we need people to take action. We need people to step up and recognize their personal responsibility. And
there are many times when I was writing this book, and I've been doing this a long time, where I got real stuck and scared. And I was like, this feels too risky. Like I'm going to, I often tell people there's like 96,000 reasons to be wrong in this book, right? There's 96,000 words enshrined and published for all of time. And every one of those words, could be a mistake that I made. So I had to like grapple with that, like, shit, that's too much risk. And
I have a hard time with an Instagram post. I cannot imagine an entire book of accountability or vulnerability.
And both, right? Because like, if I'm really walking the talk, I'm going to let myself be accountable for where I'm wrong and for what I don't understand. And I would imagine, that's here in this book, because I'm not perfect, and I'm human and I'm still learning, I'm still a student. And where I got to was that the risk was worth taking because the stakes are so high. And that's what I hope folks, I say some really scary things in this book about our future and the threats, right? The risks to our future if we don't change how we're being. And I hope that people can see that the stakes are too high to play small. The stakes are too high to not take risks or to not stretch yourself or to not be uncomfortable. And the other thing I'll say is that we're worth it. We're actually worth it. Like, I really want to believe that about us as a people and a humanity, that we're worth the risks, and playing safe and playing it small. There's something really sad, depressing about that. Like that we're not taking risks for each other, And so anyway, so that's sort of where I got to in my own journey of writing this book, and why I decided to fling my guts off a cliff. And it's kind of what I hope other people, take away, right? That the risks are just too high, and we're worth better. We deserve better. We're worth more. We're worth the risk. Take the risk.
Definitely. The risk is too high. Like, I don't understand how anybody can believe that inaction is the right course at this point, at this juncture in
But
history.
I get it, especially in a culture where there's a lot of rage and a lot of hurt and heartbreak for harm that we've done, harm that I've done. And I know often the fear for me of staying small and stuck, it is not just a playing small. Sometimes it's like I literally don't want to hurt someone. It's like, I don't want to make a mistake because I know a mistake might impact someone. I think that's real for some people.
I think that's probably real for a lot of people.
And that's why we have to build relationships, right? That have capacity and that are trusted, right? And that can hold conflict. That's, I think, one of the weakest muscle groups of our culture is that we don't know how to navigate conflict, and we don't know how to hold when hurt happens or when harm happens. And we can see that, right, as evidenced by our deeply punitive carceral system, that we only know how to punish and throw people away rather than, reconciling and holding people in their growth and their redemption. And so anyway, so like, I think there's possibility for that, right? But that's only possible if we actually build cultures of accountability and relationships that can hold that practice, right? That practice of being able to trip, make a mistake, impact someone else, and then work together towards repair.
I love that word, possibility, especially countered with the overwhelming nature of the complex issues we're facing. Like, there is possibility. We are worth it.
I do. I mean, look, and there's lots of evidence of possibility too. And, one of the things someone asked me the other day if I feel hope or despair, and I was feeling a lot of despair in that moment. And I was like struggling to access hope, when you're just in one of those moments and you're like, it don't look good. I don't know. It's not looking good from over here. And the thing that I shared was that when I feel hope, and Miriam Kaba has a great quote that hope is a discipline, right? Rebecca Solnit talks about hope as action, as a verb. So I love that orientation around the word. But when I experience hope and possibility, it's usually not on my mat or in meditation. In fact, it's usually when I'm engaged in movement work and politics. It's usually when I'm working with other people who are wanting to build a future that we all deserve. Like, that's when I feel alivened by what's emerging, right? And that counterbalances, right, all of the despair and all of the evidence of suffering, right, that we can't ignore. We can't unsee that once we've seen it. And so that's often what I tell people when they're like, how do I build? I'm like, get in there, like, get in the arena. You know what I mean? Like, take a risk, like, join an organization on the front lines, right? Follow the people who are already working to do repair and build the future that we all deserve, because that's when you feel like, you're not alone, right? You're not isolated, and you're a part of something bigger than yourself. And that is when you will feel like there is a future that is possible for us, and it is worth fighting for.
100%. I love that power of the collective. I've talked about it many times because I happen to be a huge concert fan. So live music with other people that love the same music that you love, like, it is amazing. It's therapeutic. It is my therapy. And then being at a protest, or like my very first, I've lived my adult life on an island, literally tiny island. So talk about a bubble. But my first big protest movement experience was the Women's March in DC. And what an experience that was. Talk about recognizing that you were part of a much larger whole.
And the energy, I mean, I remember that I was there, and the energy was so palpable, right? And the volume of people, like, you couldn't not understand, like, on a visceral level, the volume of people that were there, because you literally, like, couldn't move. Like, you were like sardined in there. It was amazing. And look, there have been many, many moments like that in history, right? Often we focus on the history of suffering and oppression in our country, which is real. I think it's important that we tell that story, right? Because we know that story is not being told in our schools. And it's been, and there are people trying to erase that history. And there is
so bonkers.
It's so strange. But there is also a great history of resistance, a very vibrant, consistent, alive history of resistance throughout, I'm speaking obviously about the United States of America, but throughout our, country's history, there has been resistance from the beginning. And so I also think we can take stock in that. We can build capacity from that, knowing that we're not the first, right? The Women's March was not the first, major protest that like shook things up, and it won't be the last, which is amazing. And just this weekend, there's going to be another March for Our Lives, and there's going to be many, many more movements and marches to come. And I think it's really important for us to locate ourselves in the timeline of resistance, so that we remember that there have been people that have come before us, and that have done like incredibly radical and brave things. And then there are generations that are yet to come that are going to innovate. Yeah.
Yet to come. And where we are living right now is an amazing opportunity we're living in history, and so many pivotal things being discussed, and what an opportunity to take part in that.
I love it.
So our final question is, usually when I remember to ask it, is about disrupting societal norms. And if you had a magic wand and you can wave it and get rid of one thing that our society, usually centered in an American society, but you can pick any global, what would it be? What would you disrupt?
It's hard to pick one. And yet what I want to acknowledge is that many of the toxic ideologies that I write about in American Detox, and that I think are some of the root causes of some of the most horrific and harmful things in our history and in our present day, are intersectional. They're all in collusion with one another. And so I'm thinking about like toxic individualism, and how that has been in collusion with capitalism and with the history of racism for a very long. You can't separate those things out. They were built together, I feel like, the way that I kind of reduce it in this book, this very like ridiculous, simple reduction, is that we have inherited a culture of separation, this idea that we are separate from the earth, that we are separate from each other, right? That we are separate from all life. And that belief, right, birthed colonization, right, and the doctrine of discovery, and the history and legacy of imperialism that continues to this day. The ideology of supremacy, that there is a hierarchy of bodies that determines who gets to be valued and who gets to be centered and who gets to be well and who doesn't. And we know that that is the root of systemic racism and white supremacy and abled supremacy and gender supremacy and all the supremacies that say one is more valuable than another. And scarcity, right? This idea that we're not enough.
Scarcity gets right
we're
in
not
there
enough,
too.
and
Yep.
there's not enough to go around, and they're all like related. So like maybe they're all one thing, and we just haven't put a word on it yet. I don't know, but those. So I don't know if I would disrupt one thing as much as I think we need to be super diligent and attentive to the ways in which we are both embodying those ideologies within ourselves. So I think about the way in which the ideology of separation is alive in me because I'm so deeply entrenched in individualism. This book has taught me a lot about asking for help. It is so hard for me to ask for help, and I want to do everything myself. And I think that no one will help me, and no one has time to help me, and I'm not important enough for anyone to help me. And then it becomes and now I'm alone, and then there's like resentment, and it's like
I feel like I've had the same
this
spiral of
ridiculous
thoughts. Yep.
spiral into an absurd story that's one big lie, basically.
Finishes with a pity party.
That's right. That part. Thank you for naming that. And supremacy, right? In the ways in which I've internalized the privilege of whiteness, racial privilege, and how culture has told me that I'm better, smarter, all the things, and I don't like consciously believe that about myself, but I know that I have internalized those messages in ways that I cannot see, right? I know that I engage in that narrative when I'm not paying attention, when I forget. And oh my God, scarcity all day long. I mean, even writing this book, I'm writing about perfectionism as I'm doing perfectionism, and my editor had to like remind me of that a million times. And so those are I feel like some really core roots that we need to really mind. because those, I believe, have shaped the many systems and structures of oppression and exploitation and extraction that got us here. And so for me, in my own practice, I'm in constant interrogation of that. How am I embodying a scarcity mindset? What are the ways in which I behave as if I'm better than someone else, or I'm entitled to something?
You're going back to that getting curious, right?
Yeah. And then when do I default to this idea that I'm alone and I'm an individual and I have to pull myself up by my bootstraps, right? And so and then you can do that externally too, right? So when I think about the wellness spaces that I operate in, wellness spaces that give into what, white culture, that only, hire white teachers, or that wellness companies that put white, skinny, abled bodies on their covers, right? And, political systems, right? Healthcare systems that literally exclude and ignore entire groups of people, right? Prison system, right? That targets, right? And disposes of and locks up and removes people from our communities, right? That separates families. And so how are these things happening within myself, and how do I become aware so I can disrupt that in my own practice and in my words and in my actions? And then how can I see more clearly the ways in which these ideologies are playing out in the external world? And what is my role and responsibility in disrupting that? And that, to me, so those three things, and they're kind of similar to, Dr. King talked about the three evils when he talked about the three evils being racism, militarism, and exploitation, or materialism, I think it was, right? So you can see how even those things thread back to these sort of toxic, I want to say not even ideologies, but lies. They're lies. Scarcity is a lie. There's plenty to go around.
It is. It is.
We are already enough.
Yeah. How many times I get on that soapbox? Come on, people.
So being really curious about that. And I sort of thread those themes through this entire book, because it was helpful for me in the overwhelm of all the things I was trying to unpack and unlock. And, each chapter in this book exposes a myth, but all of those myths kept pointing back, right, to the toxic culture of separation, supremacy, and scarcity. So I just kept actually going back to that, and that's been really helpful for me in my own practice, right? Because it's I don't have to have 100 analyses at all times at my fingertips. I can just be curious about what are the ways in which I'm embodying those lies, and how do I disrupt that?
And how do you, I would suggest people reading the book, check your autopilot at the door before you start, so that you can really examine how you're participating in all these. That's the uncomfortable part, right?
And the flip side of that is that once we become aware of the ways in which the spaces, the systems, the structures, even the way I'm sure we organize our families, can probably often replicate those systems. It's hard not to, because we're internalizing that as norm all the time. The flip side of that is that we get to imagine something different. What's on the other side of separation? What's on the other side of supremacy? What's on the other side of scarcity? And what is the world that we want to build, right? What are the values that we want to embody and center that we know defy, right? Counter those really toxic belief systems within ourselves and within the places and the structures that we exist in. So that part feels really hopeful for me too, right?
Oh my gosh. I just say, I love that. Goosebumps. That is such a hopeful way to look at it. And that's something we can do ourselves. We can ask ourselves what kind of world we want to live in. And are the choices and actions I'm taking every day getting me closer to that kind of world? If not, maybe adjust a little.
Yeah, that's a really great sort of GPS practice of where am I on the path? And am I moving closer to the world that I want to live in and the world that I think we all deserve? Am I standing still, right? Or am I moving further back, right? Am I living back into history, or replicating or repeating, right? The harms and the patterns of history. And so that's a really great check, right? That's a great check for people. Where are you on the path? And, and not to shame people oh, I think I'm stuck. It's okay, what are the conditions that you need to move forward or to step forward? Or what's holding you back,
Yes, because we're all unsure and we're all stuck at times. So it's just reach out. Somebody else is no doubt feeling the same way. And I feel like I could talk to you all day.
Forever, please. I love these conversations too. I want to like appreciate your work and the questions that you were already.
Likewise.
It's like a love's fest, me and you.
Right. And I am so grateful that I've found myself in your sphere. I'm not even going to.
You have to tell listeners this, y'all. We have no idea how Debbie found her way into our.
An email popped up in my inbox. I don't know if I subscribed to any of your lists. I don't.
It was the weirdest miracle of all time, and I love it.
But reading about your book, I'm like, how do I not engage with this woman? This is exactly what I've been talking about. So amazing. People need to go out and buy your book, American Detox, The Myth of Wellness and How We Can Truly Heal. Where else can people connect with you?
We're doing this book club, y'all, which is free for anyone who has a book. It's going to be great because we're going to get to like pace ourselves and also like go through this working community. It starts on June 14th and it's going to be rolling. So if it's, if you join on June 20th, like it's no big deal. You're going to have access to everything and everything's going to be recorded. It's, you can sign up at learn.americandetox.co, that's CO. And you can follow me at CTZNWELL, CTZNWELL.org, which is a nonprofit that I run that is working to democratize well-being and politicize healing. And we do like a toolkit every week and host summits and gatherings and really cool conversations. And we've also got a great podcast called Citizen. So I'm around and I'm pretty accessible. You can reach out to me. Just like give me some time because my inbox is like 27,000 emails long right now. I don't want to say that out loud because it's terrifying to my ears.
Well, it's been
Thank you.
A delight.
For me as well.
I appreciate every minute and I look forward to connecting with you in the future soon.
Thanks, Debbie.
Thank you so much for listening today. I really enjoyed talking to Kerri, and I have to let you know that since recording this episode, I've had the opportunity to spend time with her in her community and in her book club. And not only Kerri, but the people that she gathers in those spaces are people that are really ready to roll up their sleeves and do their work to be part of the solutions to work on some of these challenges that we're all facing. So I encourage you, if you're interested in any of these topics we discuss, please check out her book club. It's already started, but you can catch up. And if not, we will be doing our own book club in New World Normal probably this winter. So stay tuned for that as well. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to our show. If you enjoyed what you heard, feel free to subscribe and leave us a review. If you didn't enjoy what you heard, reach out to us and let us know how we can make it better. This show really is about all of us, not just me and my guests, but how we can all work together to make the world just a little bit better. And if you'd like to connect with us in other ways, be sure to follow us on Instagram. We also have a free Facebook group where our fans of the show can connect and discuss their favorite episodes. And in addition to that, we have a membership platform, The Collective by New World Normal, where you will participate in monthly workshops, pop-up challenges, and weekly meetings to support a more intentional lifestyle. We have meaningful conversations about important topics, all in a space that is safe, supportive, and encouraging. So join us. And if you'd like to show us some more support, check out our intentional apparel shop online, New World Intentions. You'll find t-shirts, hats, totes, all with positive messaging to help you move more mindfully through your day and help you to create that new world normal. You can also check out our affiliate page where you'll find our favorite eco-friendly household and personal care products. Thanks again for listening.